Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. I do have one quick favor before we get to the video that you came here for, and that is very simply this. You see that little red subscribe button below this video? Go ahead, smash that subscribe button. It really does help me. It really does help this channel grow and my audience grow. So go ahead and hit that red subscribe button. And now, here is the video that you came here for. All right, everybody, I am back. Good to be back. Do want to start to wrap things up here. And I do want to talk a little bit about the college basketball coaching carousel. We all know this is that time of year. There are jobs that are coming open. There are jobs that are starting to close up. And on Wednesday, we got closure on what I would argue is probably, barring something shocking, the single biggest job that is going to open up this spring. We started to get some closure on that. That job is, of course, the University of Louisville. Chris Mack resigned middle of the week after a loss to Virginia back about 5, 6, 7 weeks ago. He appears to be living his best life. I think he went to the Super Bowl. He's a big Bengals fan. But Chris Mack is out. And on Wednesday, we started to get closure on what appears to be the guy who is going to be the next head coach, and it is not surprising at all. On Wednesday, John Rothstein reported that as of Friday, so it's not official yet as I record here, but that Kenny Payne, the former Louisville basketball star, played on a national championship team there in the 1980s, former Kentucky assistant coach, current New York Knicks head coach, Kenny Payne is set to become the next head coach at Louisville. Of course, as I just said a minute ago, it will not be official until Friday, but basically we're at the cross the T's, dot the I's, make it official on Friday segment of the Kenny Payne courtship by the University of Louisville. And so let's get into it. Let's break it down. But before I do, let me just say one thing. Listen, I can beat around the bush. I can pretend. I can this. I can that. I can bury the lead. I really like this hire for Louisville. So let's get into why, and let's talk a little bit about this hire. Because to me, this was actually quietly a very fascinating hire. As I told you, when this job opened up, I said it's going to be really interesting. And this is no knock on Kenny Payne, by the way. But I said this is going to be really interesting. Because anytime a big-time job like this opens up, we want to immediately assume the biggest, craziest name is going to take the job. The problem at Louisville, of course, was they have an interim AD, and when they fired Chris Mack, or he resigned, or however you want to call it, when Chris Mack left, they had an interim AD, they had an interim school president. And so the idea that you were going to go out and get a grand slam home run hire, it wasn't looking very good, and Kenny Payne was kind of the guy, and again, this is not a knock on him, but because he's a former player, because he was obviously on part of some really great coaching staffs at both Kentucky and the University of Oregon before that, he was the very obvious guy that was going to say yes. And so my understanding of this coaching search was that the interim AD at Louisville really did want to do like a really big coaching search and go after the biggest names that he could possibly go after, like any AD would want to do in this situation. There was just a couple problems with that process. The first was that there was actually a lot of pressure internally at Louisville to hire Kenny Payne. He's well-liked. He's well-respected. He's a former player. He obviously will reunite the fan base from the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. All the former players love him. A lot of the alums love him. And obviously he was part of one of the great runs in the history of the University of Louisville. So one, there was a lot of pressure internally to hire Kenny Payne. And then two, on top of that, it sounds great on paper to want to go out and hire the biggest, craziest, boldest name that you could possibly get. And I'm not saying that maybe Mick Cronin, maybe somebody else was potentially interested. There's just one problem. All those good coaches, all the guys that you want, all the guys that you want to leave a good job for your great job at Louisville, they are still coaching right now as we speak. NCAA tournament tipped off on Thursday. A lot of those guys were coaching today. And so if you want one of those great guys, what ends up happening is you have to wait. You have to wait this week. You potentially have to wait next week. You could be waiting 3 weeks depending on who the person is that you want to interview. And so in the process of doing that, not only are chances pretty good that you're probably not going to get that guy, but there is a very good chance that you're going to lose the candidate that you know will unite your fan base in Kenny Payne. I thought it was very interesting this weekend, and I tweeted about it. But there was a report out from Louisville, not from the university, but from a local outlet there, that Kenny Payne, in addition to Louisville, was receiving interest from Missouri and Georgia. What I can tell you is, with due respect to Kenny Payne and with due respect to that reporter, That report was crap, okay? Kenny Payne was not a candidate, I'm positive, at Georgia. And I don't think he was a candidate at Missouri. It doesn't really make sense. But what Kenny Payne and his camp was doing was putting out that story basically saying, hey, Louisville, I got options, and I'm not sitting around here waiting forever. I'm not waiting 6 weeks so you can wait until after the Final Four to interview everybody that you want to interview. If you're serious about me as a candidate, you better hire me right now. And whether that was the sole reason why it got done over the last day or so, it doesn't really matter because Kenny Payne is going to be your next head coach at Louisville. And as I said, I really, really do like this hire. And so let's get into why I like this hire. First of all, the one thing we know about Kenny Payne, that man can recruit, right? And it's so funny, right? Because Indiana, of course, on Tuesday wins the play-in game in the NCAA tournament. And my next 24 hours, my Twitter mentions were a mess. Because obviously, this time last year, I was criticizing the Mike Woodson hire. Now, I love Mike Woodson now. My boy Mike effing Woodson, baby. But I was criticizing the Mike Woodson hire, and I was thinking how these two hires are very, very, very different. I didn't like the Mike Woodson hire because he was a 60-year-old man, 62, 63, whatever he is, coming into college basketball at a time that it's changing, recruiting is evolving, we have NIL, and I said, I don't know if he's ready to handle that. The one thing with Mike Woodson, though, that I never questioned, I said he's a darn good coach. He was a good coach with the Atlanta Hawks. He was a good coach with the New York Knicks. But those are my concerns with Mike Woodson. Why do I bring it up with Kenny Payne? It's the exact opposite. Never been a head coach before, so obviously there are going to be questions and concerns about him as a head coach. But the one thing that you can't question about Kenny Payne, that man can recruit. Was obviously part of Calipari's staff forever, was big time at Oregon there for a while. And to me, at the end of the day, I'll just say this. If I had the choice between a great X's and O's guy that has no interest in recruiting or the guy that loves to recruit that I'm not sure on the X's and O's, I'm going to take the guy that loves to recruit because at the end of the day, this is a talent business. And the teams with the best players generally do pretty well this time of year. And it's funny, it goes back to, I remember when Kirby Smart won that game against Florida, and Kirby Smart comes out and they're asking him how it happened and why it happened. He said, I got really good players. I can't take credit for this. And then Dan Mullen comes out and says, I don't want to talk about recruiting. It was like, that's the difference between the two teams. One coach loves to recruit, one coach doesn't. And we know that Kenny Payne does, in fact, love to recruit. Now, what I would say is I know there's been some pushback about, well, he's only been at Nike schools. He's at an Adidas school. I don't really think that's that big of a factor. First of all, sometimes a lot of this stuff is overrated, is overvalued. Zion Williamson famously played for an Adidas AAU program. He ends up at Duke. So it's not as though that's a be-all, end-all. By the way, I'd also mention, I don't think Louisville's going to be Adidas for very much longer. Put that one in the back of your head and remember that one. But beyond that, it's not really about that. First of all, he's going to get high school players because he's a great recruiter, builds relationships. I've talked to parents who have been recruited by Kenny Payne. Every single one of them swears by him, okay? So there's that element of it. But then beyond that, what I would also say is this. The reason I think Kenny Payne is going to have success, he loves to recruit, and he's coming back to college basketball in the transfer portal era, baby. That's right. The season is ending. Games are over. Teams are losing. And I'm just telling you right now, I follow the portal about as close as anybody. That portal is humming. The last day or two, we started to get real names in the portal. Jalen Bridges from West Virginia started every game in the portal. Cam Hayes, former 4-star, NC State in the portal. So I'm just throwing out names. I'm not saying they're going to go one place or the other. I'm just saying real teams, real players are starting to come into the portal. And college basketball is so unique. You only need 3 or 4 guys. You only play 6 or 7. So if Kenny Payne can go out and do in the portal, I'm not saying he's going to do it verbatim, as good as John Calipari did this year. But John Calipari flipped an entire roster, an entire program through the portal last summer. Eric Musselman does it every single year. And Kenny Payne can get talent into that program right away, and that's the one thing that program needs more than anything else is talent. Now, again, we've never seen him coach a game, but what I would also say on top of everything else, we know he's going to get players, we know he's going to get talent. Let's also keep in mind one very important thing with this Kenny Payne deal. And that very important thing, I think we all know what it is. It's that the ACC stinks. I mean, the ACC is terrible, okay? We're talking about a conference that has what? Duke, Carolina, Virginia Tech, and Notre Dame, I think, are the only teams from the conference in the NCAA tournament. Maybe I'm missing one, but Virginia Tech got in because they won the conference tournament. Notre Dame got in because they're one of the last 4 teams playing, and that's really it. And so you look at the ACC right now, just think about the ACC that Kenny Payne is walking into. The ACC that Kenny Payne is walking into, Duke is going to have a first-year, first-time head coach next year. Now, sometimes it works out. Tommy Lloyd's awesome at Arizona. But sometimes it doesn't. You're going to have North Carolina, year 2 under Hubert Davis. Hubert Davis, they got better over the course of the year. But the jury's still out on Hubert Davis, and there's a pretty good chance that if Caleb Love, Armando Bacot leave, next year's North Carolina team isn't going to be as talented as this year's North Carolina team. Syracuse is a mess. Notre Dame hasn't been good forever. Georgia Tech, you just go on and on. Everybody in that conference is awful. They're unwatchable. NC State, I love Kevin Keats. That program bottomed out this year. Now, they had some injuries, whatever. But the point I'm trying to make is the ACC is as wide open as it's ever been. And I believe that Kenny Payne, if he gets the right players and the right assistant coaches and just does this the way that I think that he is capable of doing it, I think he's going to be really, really, really good right away. A couple other factors in this that are very interesting. First of all, what I would say is this Kentucky-Louisville rivalry got really interesting. And it's funny, for years I've heard people say, Duke, North Carolina gets all the love in this college basketball rivalry conversation. But at the end of the day, Kentucky, Louisville is more heated. It's more angry. It's more this. It's more that. Duke has a bunch of alums that aren't even from North Carolina. You go down to school. You go back to New York, New Jersey, work on Wall Street, whatever. It's not as heated as Kentucky, Louisville. Fans living on top of fans. Well, I think it just got a lot more interesting. Now, a lot of Kentucky fans and Louisville fans, too, point out the fact that John Calipari really does like Kenny Payne. So it's going to be intense, but it's not going to be angry. It did feel at times angry when Rick Pitino was there. It got angry at the end with Chris Mack after he released that video 2 years ago, after he didn't play at Rupp Arena this year, and people questioned, were they really on COVID pause or was there something else going on? So John Calipari does respect Kenny Payne, so I don't think it's going to get like that. But you talk about an interesting rivalry. And I'll tell you this. I've been told by some people that would know. John Calipari really pushed for this too. Now, I'm not saying John Calipari has any say in who Louisville hires, but John Calipari was like, okay, teacher versus pupil, former assistant versus head coach at the 2 biggest schools in the state. That's going to be great for college basketball, especially at a time where, as I said, Duke and North Carolina is losing a little bit of relevance. So you talk about the excitement that this is going to create in this rivalry. It's going to be intense. A couple other thoughts. One, obviously, the big story for you recruiting nerds. If you're not a recruiting nerd, I still think this is worth monitoring. Number 1 high school junior in America, this kid named DJ Wagner. You may have heard of his father, DeJuan Wagner, who played for John Calipari at Memphis. Since DJ Wagner has basically emerged as an elite prospect the last 3-4 years, it's been considered a done deal that DJ Wagner was going to end up at Kentucky for his one-and-done year. Calipari has a great relationship with DeJuan Wagner, all that good stuff. Well, here's another wrinkle in that, and I know Kentucky fans and Louisville fans know this, but DeJuan Wagner's father is a guy named Milt Wagner, and you know where Milt Wagner played? At Louisville with Kenny Payne. And so there's already some buzz that maybe DeJuan Wagner isn't a done deal. DJ Wagner, I should say, isn't a done deal for Kentucky. Now, what I would say to that, I have no super inside information. I've never really heard a grandfather impacting recruiting before, okay? I've never really heard that element of it. And DeJuan Wagner, of course, still has a great relationship with John Calipari. I get the sense that the son will be able to make whatever decision he wants. DeJuan, from everything I hear, seems to be a very hands-off father in terms of letting his son do what he wants. They keep him around town. They're not shipping him off to prep schools. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. He's playing high school ball at Camden High School. So that'll be interesting to follow.